Why did Moses run away from Egypt and find himself in Midian? I think the reason is made clear by the story. Hindi niya babata. He could not bear the sight of so much pain being endured by the Hebrew slaves. He also could not understand why he was so deeply affected by the sufferings of these people, in spite of the fact that he was raised in a palace as an Egyptian prince and did not yet know his identity as a son of a Hebrew slave himself. One day, he must have felt so angry when he saw one Egyptian taskmaster physically abusing a Hebrew slave. He defended the slave and ended up killing the abuser. It was after that incident that Moses ran away, according to the story. Maybe to understand who he was and why these slaves affected him so much. He wanted a life that was more quiet and peaceful, away from violence and cruelty. And so, he found himself in Midian, where he married a girl, had a child with her, worked as a shepherd for his father-in-law, and he intended to settle there for good until that one fine day when God disturbed his peace again and appeared to him in the form of a flaming bush whose fire simply would not get consumed. The encounter began with a plain curiosity about something. Bakit nagliliyab ang puno pero hindi nauubos ang apoy? You know, I call the burning bush the image of a God in pain. Ang Diyos na nasasaktan. Well, some philosophers react to the concept of a suffering God. Absurd daw ito. Absurd. And they invented a word, impassible. Hindi impossible, kundi impassible. It's supposed to be a philosophical word, an attribute of the perfect God, meaning that God thou is incapable of suffering, because thou suffering is supposed to be a sign of imperfection. Pero ako, I beg to disagree. Kasi if God is a God of love, how can God not suffer when the ones He loves are suffering? Itanong niyo yun sa sarili ninyo. Kung tunay kang nagmamahal, pwede bang hindi ka maapektuhan sa pagdurusa ng minamahal mo? And so the message Moses got from the burning bush can be paraphrased in this way. Para bang sinasabi ni God sa kanya, Moses, are you miserable seeing the misery of those slaves in Egypt? I want you to know that the pain that you are feeling inside is my pain. It is what I myself feel when I see the affliction of my people, when I hear their cry, when I witness their sufferings. I want you to feel it yourself. If you want to know kung sino ka ba talaga, I am as connected to them as you are to them. And these slaves are your own people. as they are my people. And you will not stop feeling the pain until you have done something to help them out of their state of oppression. Si Moses dito sa reading na to is like the child that Jesus is talking about in our gospel reading today. He is in that disposition of childlikeness that makes him disposed to receive God's revelation. Sometimes, we are unable to pick up the messages of God to us, especially if we only stay in the level of reason. There were things that did not make sense to Moses, and he had to struggle within himself to make sense of what he was going through. He could have simply dismissed it. He could have simply rationalized it or justified it. But he did not. He allowed God to speak to his imagination. Nung estudyante pa ako sa Loyola School of Theology, I remember one professor who said in our class, if God were to appear in a burning bush to a person whose imagination is dormant and walang ginagamit kundi reason, baka instead of taking the shoes out of his feet, taking the shoes off from his feet, baka naghanap siya ng fire extinguisher. Albert Einstein once said, imagination is greater than knowledge. Believe me, God speaks a lot through your imagination. And we limit our capacity for knowledge when we stifle our imagination, when we lose our childlike sense of awe and wonder, when we reduce our faith to reason, to rationality, we will not be able to see and experience God anymore in a leaf that springs forth after winter, in a flower that is blossoming, in the cry of a newborn child, or in a little act of kindness and compassion. We will not be able to feel what God feels when we lose touch, when we cannot allow the Holy Spirit to connect us to God's heart so that we can feel what God feels.